This lecture is on the European theme in the Arabic novel, case studies from Egypt and Kuwait. As probably most of you know, European settings, characters, societies are a very recurrent motif in modern Arabic literature from the 19th century up to the present. And this lecture is the result of a long engagement that I had with theoretical questions related to the study of this theme. I will use this, let's see if it works. Yeah. So, today I will address these research questions. Why this pervasive presence of European in Arabic novels, of Europe in Arabic novels? What narrative function does the European theme perform in Arabic literature? And how did these functions change along history? I will address these research questions with this thesis. My thesis is that in the Arabic novel, specific representations of Europe and the West have been used strategically in the production of different images of national identity and competing visions of modernity. This is my approach to the study of the European theme in the Arabic novel. But this approach to these specific questions, research question, implies an epistemological revolution with respect to dominant paradigms or hegemonic paradigms. And this epistemological revolution goes beyond the theme of this lecture. Within these perspectives, civilizations are not neutral signifiers of factual realities or the reflection of a natural order of thinking and speaking of our present world. This means that this lecture is also a general invitation in our work as scholars to overcome civilizational paradigms that, in my opinion, are misleading, and approach the West, when we come with notions of civilizations, in this case the West, as a cultural political construct that has been used for different and opposing political ends in various fields. I will structure this lecture in 4 points. The first one deals with the production of the Egyptian national imaginary during the first decades of the 20th century, and I will focus on a very famous novel by Tawfiq al-Hakim, Awdat al-Ruh, The Return of the Spirit. I will speak later about the importance of this novel. But this novel is more than a novel, because it is a work that contributed to spread a specific national imaginary in Egypt. It was very influential, also because then there were many musalsalat, many soaps, no? That were made, so also through television, it had a very strong impact. The second point deals with European female characters, with the use of European female characters in the Arabic novels. I will interpret these characters as tropes of a world civilization, of the European civilization. The second point deals with novels published in one only decade, from 1935 to 1945. But it is a very important decade, because in these 10 years, 3 masterpieces of Arabic narrative were published. 1935 we have Adib by Taha Hussein. They all deal with the European theme. They are centered on the European theme. Adib by Taha Hussein, 1935. Then Usfur min al-Sharq, A Bird from the East, 1938. And Qindil Hashim by Yahya Haqqi, 1945. I will try to map, to describe the morphology of the trope in these novels, and then in the third point, I will describe the transformation of this trope from the 1960s up to the present. And finally, in the fourth point, I will draw a parallel between the Egyptian novelistic tradition and the production of young Kuwaiti novelists. I say young Kuwaiti novelists, but because they come from a young generation, but they are very well-established figures. Muhammad Qaisa and Saud al-Sanaussi, they are well-known figures in the Arabic literary scene, not only the national one. So, let's start with the first point, Audat al-Ruh, the return of the spirit. As I've said, it is probably the most influential national allegory. That the notion of national allegory is one of elaborated by Frederick Jameson, an American literary theorist, that describes this power of the novel and the relationship between the novel genre and the nation, how the novel genre was the privileged locus to imagine the nation and to spread imaginaries of the nation that were interiorized by the population. This novel is set, Audat al-Ruh, it was published in 1933, but is set in 1919, that is at the time of the National Revolution. What are the narrative functions performed by the European theme in this novel? Ideas and social values that were well present, well represented in Egypt at the time, are represented in this novel, are associated to the essence of Europe. So there were ideas, social values, that were shared by many Egyptian intellectuals, but in this novel they are represented as part of European civilization, as part of the essence of Europe, and opposed to the author's own vision of the nation. In this way, the author can legitimize his own vision of the nation and his own political agenda as authentically Egyptian, and delegitimize the opposite one as part of foreign culture. We are at Cephas, so I thought, when I was looking for passages from this novel to quote here, I thought that I had to quote one with the French archaeologists as an homage to not only to the archaeological tradition of Cephas, but also to the audience who in part is formed by archaeologists. Interesting enough, here the French archaeologist speaks as the authorial voice. I mean, this passage is set in the Nile Delta, in the house of the hero's parents. The hero is a young Egyptian who is studying in Cairo, is hosted at the house of his uncles, and in this part of the novel he goes back to his parents' house in the countryside. The countryside, it is very important in Egyptian novels. In Arabic literature, the desert is more important. But in the novel genre, the countryside becomes central, key, because Egyptian intellectuals were embracing environmental determinism, the idea that the national spirit was shaped by the environment of the Nile Valley. So it is not a chance that this passage, which is a key passage in the novel, is set in the Nile Delta, in the countryside. There is a French archaeologist, the voice of the author, who discusses with the British inspector, who despises the Egyptian peasants. And he cannot understand why the archaeologist is so interested in them. For the archaeologists, the peasants are the embodiment of the spirit of ancient Egypt. The archaeologist builds a parallel between the ancient builders of the pyramids and contemporary Egyptian peasants. So, let's read together this passage. Our language, says the archaeologists, have terms only for the material reality. It's important here that material is associated to the essence of Europe. The idea of Europe as a material civilization was very spread at the time in Egypt. So we cannot imagine the feelings, so feelings associated to Egyptian nationhood, that have made all these people a single person. We have the idea of national unity, capable of bearing on his shoulders huge stones for the length of 20 years. He was smiling, so he's drawing this parallel between the peasants and the builders of the pyramids. He was smiling, cheerful and friendly, happy to suffer in the name of his idol, al-ma'bud, the worshipped, literally. In the second passage, there is a move. The Egyptian peasants are contrasted to the European working class. This is the other difference between them and us. Our workers, when they suffer together, let grow among them the seeds of revolution, the discontent for what they suffer, disobedience. So these are the Europeans. Their peasants, when they suffer together, feel a secret satisfaction and the pleasure for the unity, again, unity in sufferings. What a wonderful industrial people for the day of tomorrow. And yes, there is the closure of the passage. So, ancient Egyptians, contemporary peasants, and the industrial people for this project of modernity, which is projected in the future, but with these same characteristic features that distinguish the Egyptian people and that which make of Egypt an industrial country in the day of tomorrow. So, as you see in these passages, Europe and Egypt are depicted as opposite civilizations. But if you consider more in depth the language which is used, expressions with which Europe and Egypt are characterized, you see that they are two competing visions of modernity and the national community, both of them well represented in Egyptian society. So now they are the national identity is constructed through binary position. The notion of unity against the individualism of the Europeans, intuitive knowledge versus rational knowledge, the organic community versus social conflict. The project of modernization embraced by Al-Hakim here is the one of the organic community. And despite the fact that it is presented as authentic, is largely derived by what Zev Sternil, an historian of the ideas, has named the anti-Enlightenment tradition. Especially French thinkers, such as Hippolyte Taine, Ernest Renan, Gustave Le Bon. They had a project of modernity based on the idea of cultural particularism and of limited rights, a closed form of liberalism. He associates Europe with rational knowledge, social conflict, ideas that were very present in Egyptian society, but that here are represented as European values. Let's move now I move now to the second point, the European woman trope. The narrative functions performed in the Egyptian novel by the European female characters. Here we have an image of a cover of Usfur min al-Sharq, a bird from the east, the novel by Tawfiq al-Hakim. As I said in the introduction, the second point deals with novels published between 1935 and 1945. This is one of these novels. We see a blonde character, which is the heroine, who is the heroine of this novel, the Egyptian hero behind her, and in the background, the Tour Eiffel. Of course, this image speaks for itself. Of course, this character is not just a European girl, a European young woman. She is Europe. She embodies a civilization. That's why I speak of a European woman trope. It's an icon for something else, something wider and bigger. In these novels, here we have Usfur min al-Sharq, but I said the first one was Adib, and then we have by Taha Hussein, and then in the 1945 we have Yahya Haki's Kinil Hashim. The plot is very similar. The narrative dynamics. We have the European hero who is a student in Adib and Usfur min al-Sharq in Paris. In Yahya Haki's novel, he is in England. He gets in love with a European girl, and he has a love story with her. This love story changes him completely. He experiences a crisis, he goes through a very deep crisis, comes out transformed from this crisis. But after a while, during this relationship with the European girl, he feels a strong sense of disillusion and even hatred towards the European woman, and he rejects her. This is a pattern that is followed in a way by the three novels. Despite this fact, the narrative strategies of the three novels are very different. I will come later on the narrative strategies of the three novels. I want before to say that these dynamics can be well interpreted and framed through the notion of triangular desire elaborated by René Girard in Menzogne romantique et vérité romanesque. You know about the idea of triangular desire, the fact that we desire, what we desire is not freely chosen. We desire through the mediation of someone else. There is a third component in desire. The desiring subject, the object of the desire, and the mediation. But according to Girard, there are two types of mediator. There is external mediation and internal mediation. In the traditional pre-modern Roman, the mediation is always external. Girard gives the example of Don Quixote. Don Quixote desires through Amadis de Gaula. Amadis de Gaula is a literary character. Is not present. Is not present in the scene. Is a literary character, a model embraced by the hero, and the hero chooses. His narrative actions are orientated by what he expects Amadis de Gaula would have done. In Madame Bovary, you know, of course, the novel, the heroine lives in the province, in the French province, and dreams of the French capital, of the salons of the French capital. So the mediation is still external, but the subject and the mediator are closer. He dreams, and what she desires is through the literature produced in Paris, and what she has learned, what she has imagined about Paris. In Le Rouge et Le Noir, the subject who comes out from outside the world of the mediator gets into this world. According to Girard, internal mediation leads to feelings of resentment towards the mediator. The ultimate end of internal mediation, according to Girard, is the metamorphosis into the ontological essence of the woman mediator. But this metamorphosis does not give the happiness that and the does not fulfill the desire that felt by the hero. So fulfillment leads to disillusionment and then hatred. The Egyptian heroes, after they experience this coveted metamorphosis, after disillusionment, feel the same hatred towards the mediator. This, as I've said, is a common pattern, but the narrative strategies with which this pattern is used is very different in the three novels that I have chosen. In particular, in Adib by Taha Hussein, we have a very different use of this same pattern. In Husum in al-Sharq, the concept of focalization by Genet. Focalization is not only point of view, but a commonness of feelings, of perceptions. In Husum in al-Sharq, the focalization of the character, of the hero, and the voice of the author, and the perception of the author are very close, are almost the same. In Kindil Hashim as well, but while in the first novel there is a rejection of the values embodied by Europe, in Kindil Hashim there is the attempt of finding a way out, to finding a compromise. The third novel uses the strategy in a completely different way, because next to the hero, there is the character, the autobiographical character of Taha, the young Taha, who criticizes the choices of Adib. Not only the choices he makes in Europe, but his very attitude to the travel. He is married, Adib is the hero of this last novel, is married to an Egyptian woman from the countryside, clearly the embodiment of Egypt, and this is, of course, an allegory. He chooses to divorce from her in order to travel to Europe, as if the possibility of experiencing Europe and being married to an Egyptian woman cannot be conciliated. Taha is very critical of this stance of the hero. And at the same point, the voice of the author, of the old author, of Taha Hussein, the writer, intrudes into the narration and says, "I've traveled a lot to France and to Europe, and I know that this attitude is terrible." So he feels the need to intervene directly, to criticize the choices of Adib. Ultimately, after this love story with the two European characters, Adib gets mad. And according to my interpretation of this novel, this madness is a metaphor of the failure of a vision of modernization, a project of modernization of a whole generation of Egyptian writers. So Egyptian writers of the same generation of Taha Hussein, but of whom Taha Hussein is very critical. So as you see, the pattern is the same with the two novels, but the narrative uses made by the author are completely different. I come now to the third point, which is about the transformation of the European woman trope after the 1960s. I will be particularly brief here, because I want to arrive to the fourth point, to the Kuwaiti novels. I don't read all the titles, but you can see there are, we start with a novel published in the 1960s, they're all very well-known authors in Egypt, and we arrive to 2013. All these novels have a common attitude towards, a common attitude, a common pattern in the functions performed by the European female character, a pattern which is the reversal of the one that we have observed in the previous novels. So what are the common features of these novels? European heroines become characterized as women to love, whose personalities reflect an intimate part of the hero's selfhood. So we have fragmented subject with subjects that find in the European heroine a part of the self. They find self-assertiveness, security in this relationship. So it's a positive relationship. It does not lead to a crisis. And in some of these novels, for example, there is in a novel, the first one, Al-Safin wal-Bari by Fatih Ghanim, the mother clearly embodies Egypt, and the hero recognizes in a Swedish woman his mother. So there is, the European female characters are drawn into the sphere of the self. If in the previous novels the self was constructed, defined through the opposition to the European other, now we have characters who are drawn into the sphere of the self. As European female characters are drawn into the sphere of the self, and the imaginary boundary that circumscribes and defines the Asian community, the nation, dominant nationalist narratives are put into question. The focus of the text is no longer on the hero's desire, but on the political situation, the political reality that hinders their happiness. I move to the final point to draw a parallel with contemporary Kuwaiti novels. So, are the functions performed by Europe in Kuwaiti novels the same of Egyptian novels? No. The European theme in the Kuwaiti, in recent Kuwaiti novels perform different functions, but I think it's significant that the debut works by these two leading figures of the new generation of Kuwaiti writers are set, at least in part, in Europe. The first novel, ارتطام لم يسمع له داوي by Buthan al-Aisa, was published in 2004 when the author was in her 20s. While Sajin al-Maraya is also the first novel by Saud al-Sanhusi, and it was published in 2011. What are the common features of this novel, the common uses of the European theme? In both novels, we have the centrality of the national question, and this can be understood. The redefinition of the national imaginary after the liberation of Kuwait. The situation of the country is very different from the one of Egypt. So if contemporary Egyptian authors can have an iconoclastic attitude towards dominant representations of the nation, hegemonic imaginaries of the nation, in Kuwait, the young generation of writers feel the need to contribute to define the national community after such a shock as the occupation of the country. The self here is not defined in opposition to Europe, as it was in the novels published in the 30s and 40s in Egypt. European characters are less central than in Egyptian novels, but it's interesting anyway that it is in Europe that the heroes of these two novels redefine their relationship with homeland, with Kuwait, and also nourish their love for their homeland. Let's consider separately the two works. Irtitan. The novel is set in Uppsala, in Sweden, with the occasion of the young heroine's participation to the biology Olympics. Do you know there are these Olympics, these competitions for students usually of high school. They are very bright, the best students of their country. They go to an Olympic that is an international competition. In this case, it's a competition in biology. The heroine fails in the competition. She arrives last. And she even doesn't take part to the second stage. The competition is based in two stages. There are two days dedicated to different abilities, and she does, after the first one, she does not participate to the second stage. The European characters in this novel are really in the background. We can feel them through the feelings of uneasiness and inadequacy of the protagonist. Why? Because of their misconceptions on Kuwait, their imaginary of the country as something, a rich country full of oil, and that's all. She feels that they don't know anything about her context. But apart from this, and the fact that the professor who comes with her is very interested in the Swedish blonde girls, we know this particular, but apart from this, the European characters are on the background. And the key role is performed by a Kuwaiti character, is a Bedouin, and is without nationality. The heroine experiences a love story with him, a platonic love story, anyway, a deep knowledge of this character who has been living in Sweden for many years. And this character makes her rethink her relationship with her homeland and even reappropriate her identity. It is very interesting the way the novel concludes. There is the award ceremony, and she has to take her prize as the last position on the world competition. She's paralyzed with terror, and there are the flags, the national anthems, and they start calling from the last one. So they call her name, but she's paralyzed by terror. And this man, his friend, stands up in her place and goes to take the prize for her. And the way it makes a wonderful performance while going to the stage. And people in the audience start to like him and start to develop a sympathy for Kuwait. I conclude now with the last slide, with the other Kuwaiti novel that I have chosen for this presentation, Sajin and Maraya, The Prisoner of Mirrors by Saud al-Sanusi. Here the love story is set in Kuwait between two Kuwaiti characters, the Kuwaiti hero, male hero, and a Kuwaiti girl. But the hero proves a difficulty in facing this story, and at some point he decides to go to England to improve his English language, his competence in English language. Why? Because she dominates the language and he wants to be at her level. When he travels to England, he goes to study in a summer school, he is hosted by an English family, and next to his room there is an English girl, and between the two develops a strong friendship, just a strong friendship. This friendship helps the protagonist to find self-assertiveness, and when he comes to Kuwait, he discovers that the girl he loves has another relationship with another person. Of course, he undergoes a crisis, but he's able to overcome this crisis. And the doctor who cures him, he advises him to write. I think there are strong biographical components in this novel. Anyway, Europe, as we have said before, in both novels performs a different function from those we have observed in Egypt, less central, but it is a place where, from a condition of distance, the character can rethink in a positive way his relationship or her relationship with homeland, become more conscious of his or her national identity. I conclude here just by saying that I hope to have shown how the European theme, the representation of Europe in the Arabic novel cannot be approached only in terms of images and perceptions of the other, because it is related to wider narrative strategies in the text. So I just want to thank you with this image and